Step into a 1950s kitchen for a second. The floor is cool. The radio is on low. And the whole house seems to pause when the oven door opens. Because for a lot of families, dinner was the one moment that had to feel steady. Even in a decade people remember as bright and booming, money still ran tight in plenty of homes. Rent had to be paid. Kids had to be fed. And one paycheck had to stretch across a whole week. But what many people forget is that the 1950s dinner table was shaped by two forces at the same time. New convenience foods were showing up fast, like canned soups, box mixes, and frozen dinners. Yet the habits of thrift from the 1930s and the wartime 1940s were still fresh in people's hands. Mothers and grandmothers knew how to stretch a pound of ground beef. They knew how to turn leftovers into something that looked new. They knew how to make a cheap meal feel like a proper supper. So tonight, we're going back to that world. 30 budget meals from the 1950s. Not fancy party food. Not perfect magazine food. Real weeknight dinners that fed real families. Some came from casseroles and cans. Some came from skillets and soup pots. And one of the most comforting meals of all came from a simple idea. If you cannot buy more food, you make the food you have feel bigger. The 1950s were a time of change in American kitchens. After World War II, many families were building new lives. Some moved to suburbs. Some stayed in city apartments. Some lived in small towns where nothing changed much at all. The Cold War hung in the background, and the Korean War touched many families too. But day-to-day life was often about routine. Work, school, church, and dinner at home. Food mattered because it was where you could show care with limited means. A warm casserole meant you planned ahead. A soup pot meant you made something from scraps. A skillet supper meant you could feed everyone fast. And through it all, there was a quiet pride in making do without making it look like making do. We'll start with a dish that might be the most recognizable 1950s budget dinner of all. Tuna noodle casserole was built from pantry basics. Egg noodles, a can of tuna, and a creamy sauce, often made easier with canned soup. Peas or chopped celery might go in, depending on a house. People ate it because tuna was affordable and shelf-stable, and noodles made the meal feel big. It mattered because one could feed a whole family when stretched right. The human detail is the crunchy top, made from crumbs or crushed crackers, the part everyone wanted. From tuna, many kitchens reached for another casserole that felt even more company-ready, even when it was made on a tight budget. Chicken a la king was creamy chicken and vegetables served over toast, rice, or noodles. In some homes, it used leftover roast chicken. In others, it used canned chicken when that was easier. The sauce often started with butter, flour, and milk, or a shortcut from a can. People ate it because it stretched small bits of meat into a full meal. It mattered because it felt elegant without costing much. The human detail is the toast underneath, soaking up sauce and turning simple bread into comfort. If chicken a la king felt fancy, another creamy meal was pure practicality, especially when a can of soup could do half the work. Creamed chipped beef on toast, often known simply as a warm plate of SOS, used dried beef stirred into a white sauce and poured over toast. The ingredients were simple, and the saltiness made it taste like something stronger than it was. People ate it because dried beef kept well and a little went far. It mattered because it put meat on the table even when fresh cuts were expensive. The human detail is the way the toast softens, turning crisp bread into a fork and knife meal. From creamy sauces, we moved to a dinner that could make a small amount of beef feel like a main event. Meatloaf was a budget classic for a reason. Ground beef mixed with breadcrumbs, oats, or cracker crumbs, plus onion and seasoning. Some families added grated carrot or mashed potato to stretch it even further. It was baked, sliced, and served with whatever sides were available. People ate it because it used cheap meat and fed everyone fairly. It mattered because leftovers made tomorrow's sandwiches. The human detail is the ketchup or tomato glaze on top, brushed carefully like it was a finishing touch. And what came next was even more thrifty because it often began with what was left in the pan. Hamburger gravy over mashed potatoes used brown ground beef, a simple gravy made with flour and milk, and a pile of mashed potatoes to catch it all. It was comfort food with a working-class backbone. People ate it because it was filling and fast, and potatoes stretched the plate. It mattered because it made a small amount of meat feel abundant. The human detail is the mashed potato well in the center of the plate, made on purpose to hold the gravy. If you had ground beef, there was another meal that could feed a crowd and still taste like home. American goulash, sometimes called slumgullion in older memories, was a one-pot mix of macaroni, tomatoes, onion, and ground beef when there was enough. It simmered into a thick, red, comforting pot. People ate it because it was cheap and easy, and pasta made it go far. It mattered because one pot meant less cleanup and more food. The human detail is the big spoon, stirring through steam, while the radio plays in the background. From goulash, spaghetti was never far behind, especially as pasta became more common on American tables. Spaghetti with meat sauce was often made with canned tomatoes, onion, and ground beef stretched thin, simmered until the sauce felt rich. Some homes added a little sugar to smooth the acidity. Others added a splash of leftover coffee, an old trick in some families. People ate it because it was filling and fed kids easily. It mattered because it turned a pound of meat into many plates. The human detail is the stained wooden spoon, used so often for sauce it seemed to carry the smell. If for families who wanted a steak dinner feeling without a steak price, there was a diner-style answer. Salisbury steak was seasoned ground beef shaped into patties, browned, then served with gravy, often alongside mashed potatoes. It was simple, but it felt like a proper supper. People ate it because it used cheap meat while still looking like a special plate. It mattered because presentation mattered when money was tight. The human detail is the gravy poured over the patties at the table, like the final step in a small ceremony. Sometimes the budget meal was not about beef at all. It was about the humble hot dog and the way it could turn beans into a full dinner. Beans and Franks was baked beans warmed with sliced hot dogs, often served with bread. It was quick, sweet, and filling. People ate it because hot dogs were affordable and beans were cheap calories that could stretch the pot. It mattered because it fed kids fast on busy nights. The human detail is the pot set right on the table, because this was the kind of meal you served family style, with everyone taking what they needed. From beans and Franks, many families lean into another baked bean dinner, especially on weekends. Baked beans with brown bread, in some homes, was a full supper, not just a side. Beans sweetened with molasses or brown sugar, sometimes with a bit of salt pork, served with bread that felt hearty. People ate it because dried beans were inexpensive and baked beans lasted for days. It mattered because leftovers meant security. The human detail is the thick, sticky spoonful, dark and glossy, that clings to the spoon like it does not want to be wasted. If the pantry was thin, the soup pot often took over because soup could turn scraps into something warm. Ham and bean soup was often made from a leftover ham bone, dried beans, onion, and whatever vegetables were available. It simmered until thick, turning one bone into a meal for many. People ate it because it was cheap protein and very filling. It mattered because it made use of leftovers in a respectful way. The human detail is the smell that fills the house, smoky and steady, telling you dinner has been working for hours. Another soup that showed up when vegetables needed using was a classic that could be stretched endlessly. Vegetable beef soup used a small amount of beef, potatoes, carrots, onions, and tomatoes, sometimes with barley. In many homes, the beef was more flavor than substance. People ate it because it was nourishing and flexible, and it could be made from whatever was on hand. It mattered because a big pot could feed the family twice. The human detail is the bowl served with crackers, the kind you crumble in by hand and watch soften. For coastal families, or anyone who trusted the freezer section, budget fish dinners started to become common in the 1950s. Fish sticks with peas and mashed potatoes was a simple, kid-friendly plate. Fish sticks were affordable, easy to cook, and felt modern. Peas added green, and mashed potatoes made it filling. People ate it because it was quick and predictable, and it kept the meal within budget. It mattered because convenience was becoming part of family life. The human detail is the ketchup on the side, used carefully because even a simple sauce could make a plain dinner feel complete. If fish sticks were the new freezer era, bologna was the old reliable. Fried bologna and potatoes was a skillet supper that smelled like thrift. Bologna slices fried until the edges curled, served with potatoes or bread. People ate it because bologna was cheap and easy to store, and frying added flavor and texture. It mattered because a small purchase could feed several mouths. The human detail is the curling bologna cup in the pan, catching grease, making kids laugh even when money was serious. And then there was the sandwich that could become dinner with almost no warning. Grilled cheese and tomato soup was warm, fast, and deeply comforting. Bread, a modest slice of cheese, butter or margarine, and a bowl of tomato soup made from a can or from pantry tomatoes. People ate it because it was cheap and everyone liked it. It mattered because it felt like care on a hard day. The human detail is the first bite, when the cheese pulls slightly and the soup steam fogs the bowl. From grilled cheese, another bread-based supper often showed up when the refrigerator held eggs and not much else. Egg salad sandwiches for supper were simple and filling. Hard-boiled eggs chopped with a bit of mayonnaise or salad dressing, salt, and pepper, served on bread with a side of whatever was in the kitchen. People ate it because eggs were a relatively affordable protein, and sandwiches stretched them. It mattered because it turned a small ingredient into a family meal. The human detail is the eggs being peeled at the kitchen table, shells gathered neatly, because mess was not welcome in a busy house. If egg salad was simple, another spread felt even more old-fashioned pantry. Deviled ham sandwiches use canned deviled ham, sometimes mixed with relish or chopped pickles to stretch it and soften the salt. It was spread thin on bread because a little went a long way. People ate it because canned meat was dependable and quick. It mattered because it let a family serve meat sandwiches without buying fresh cuts. The human detail is the small can open with a key, then rinsed and saved because thrift was still a habit. Now we return to the oven because budget meals in the 1950s loved a casserole dish. Cream of mushroom casserole with ground beef, sometimes made with noodles or rice, was a classic shortcut dinner. A can of soup became sauce. A small amount of beef became flavor. The starch became the bulk. People ate it because it was easy, filling, and cheap compared to a full meat meal. It mattered because it saved time and money at once. The human detail is the casserole dish set on the table still hot. The first scoop steaming like the house is offering comfort. If you had peppers and rice, you could make a meal that looked impressive without being expensive. Stuffed peppers were often filled with rice, onion, and a small amount of ground beef, plus tomatoes or sauce. Some homes made them meatless and leaned on rice. People ate them because stuffing makes a little look like a lot. It mattered because it was a smart way to stretch ration-like budgets, even after rationing ended. The human detail is the pepper standing upright in the pan, holding its shape like it is trying its best. And if peppers were not around, cabbage often stepped in, because cabbage was cheap and lasted. Cabbage rolls, in many families, were cabbage leaves wrapped around a filling of rice, onion, and a little meat, then baked in tomato sauce. Different regions made different versions, often tied to immigrant traditions. People ate them because cabbage and rice stretched meat and made the meal hearty. It mattered because it used inexpensive staples and fed many. The human detail is the smell of tomato and cabbage together, filling the house in a way you never forget. From cabbage rolls, a similar comfort showed up in other homes under a different name and shape. Shepherd's pie, or cottage pie in some families, used leftover meat and vegetables under a layer of mashed potatoes, baked until the top browned. People ate it because leftovers became a fresh meal, and potatoes made everything filling. It mattered because it reduced waste and stretched expensive ingredients. The human detail is the brown ridges on top, made by a fork like someone wanted it to look nice even on a budget. Now let's talk about the meal that turned cheap chicken parts into a Sunday feeling on a Wednesday budget. Chicken and dumplings was often made from stewing hen or leftover chicken, simmered into broth with onion and carrots when available. Dumplings made from flour and fat were dropped in to make it filling. People ate it because it stretched a small amount of meat into a full pot. It mattered because it brought warmth and comfort without needing a lot of meat. The human detail is the lid lifting, steam rolling out, and dumplings puffed up like little clouds. And what came next was even simpler, because sometimes the budget meal was just a hot bowl that could quiet a house. Potato soup in the 1950s was often made with potatoes, onion, milk, and a bit of butter or margarine, with bacon bits only when the budget allowed. It was thick, warm, and easy to serve. People ate it because potatoes were cheap and filling. It mattered because it made dinner possible when the pantry was nearly empty. The human detail is the pot on low heat, stirred slowly while homework is done at the table. From soup, we move to a plate that many kids remember as a special dinner, even though it was built from thrift. Pork chops and rice, in a budget version, used thin pork chops browned and then simmered with rice so the rice absorbed all the flavor. One chop could be split or served smaller because the rice carried the meal. People ate it because rice was cheap and stretching meat was necessary. It mattered because it made a small meat purchase feel like a full supper. The human detail is the rice at the edge of the plate, flavored and slightly browned, the part everyone ate first. When pork chops were too expensive, another meatless dinner often stepped up, especially in Catholic homes on Fridays. Macaroni and tomatoes was a simple pot of pasta mixed with canned tomatoes, onion, and seasoning, sometimes with a bit of cheese if available. People ate it because it was cheap, filling, and fast, and it used pantry staples. It mattered because it provided a hearty meal without meat. The human detail is the tomato sauce splatter on the stove, a sign that someone was cooking in a hurry. And if the kitchen had a little cheese, another simple meal could feel like a gift. Cheese and potato casserole used sliced potatoes layered with a modest amount of cheese and a creamy sauce. It baked into a warm dish that felt rich even when the cheese was used carefully. People ate it because potatoes were cheap and cheese added satisfaction. It mattered because it made a meatless night feel complete. The human detail is the smell when it comes out of the oven, that warm dairy scent that makes people appear in the doorway. Now we step into a meal that often arrived at the end of the week when leftovers were starting to look lonely. Fried rice with leftovers, in a 1950s home version, used leftover rice, a bit of chopped meat or ham, onions, and an egg if the house could spare it. Not everyone called it fried rice, but many families made some version of it. People ate it because it prevented waste and created a new flavor. It mattered because stretching food was still a skill, even in prosperous years. The human detail is the pan moving fast, the cook trying to keep everything from sticking. From fried rice, we moved to a dinner that came from the oven and used one of the oldest budget tricks of all. Pot roast with root vegetables was not always cheap at the butcher, but it was economical in how it fed a family. A tougher cut cooked low and slow with potatoes, carrots, and onions until tender. People ate it because slow cooking made inexpensive cuts tender and flavorful. It mattered because one roast could become 2 or 3 meals. The human detail is the carved slices served carefully because everyone knows the roast has to last. And when the roast was gone, the leftovers often became the next budget meal almost automatically. Roast beef sandwiches with gravy used thin slices of leftover meat on bread, sometimes topped with gravy to moisten and stretch it. It was simple, but it felt hearty. People ate it because leftovers had value, and gravy made small portions satisfying. It mattered because it turned yesterday's dinner into today's meal without spending more. The human detail is the warm gravy poured slowly, making the sandwich feel like a plate dinner, not just lunch. Now we come to a meal that could be made from almost nothing, but still felt like you tried. Pancakes for supper were a real thing in many homes. Flour, baking powder, milk, and sometimes no eggs at all if eggs were being saved. Served with a little syrup, jam, or even just butter and sugar. People ate them because they were quick, filling, and cheap. They mattered because not every night allowed for planning and cooking. The human detail is the stack on a plate in the middle of the table, everyone reaching for one more because it is warm and easy. And finally, we end with a budget meal that did not need a recipe card because it was really a habit. The weeknight leftover plate was common in the 1950s, even if nobody named it. A little meat from yesterday, a scoop of potatoes, some canned corn, a slice of bread, maybe pickles. People ate it because leftovers could not be wasted and because budgets were built on using everything. It mattered because it shows the real truth of home cooking. The table was held together by small decisions. The human detail is the mismatched plates and the quiet understanding that everyone is doing their part by not complaining. By the end of these 30 budget meals, you can feel the rhythm of the 1950s kitchen. It is not just about food. It is about the way families balance pride with practicality. They used canned soup as a shortcut, but they still cooked. They stretched meat, but they still served it. They leaned on potatoes, noodles, and rice because those were affordable, but they found ways to make them feel different night to night. They carried older habits from the Depression and the war, even as new products promised an easier life. And what many people forget is that thrift can be a kind of love. Not flashy love, quiet love, the kind that shows up as a hot casserole on the table, a pot of soup simmering while laundry dries, a sandwich that becomes supper because the day was too hard for anything else. So when you look back at the 1950s, don't just picture shiny appliances and perfect ads. Picture the real kitchens behind the pictures. The ones where budgets were tight, kids were hungry, and dinner still happened anyway. Because history does not only live in headlines. Sometimes it lives in a casserole dish, carried to the table, still steaming, saying the same thing families have always wanted to hear. There is food, there is home, and for tonight, that is enough. Post-World War II America saw a rapid increase in birth rates, lasting from 1946 through 1964. It became known as the baby boom, and the 1950s were smack dab in the middle of it. During the 50s, around 4 million babies were born every year in America, a sharp increase from the previous average of around 2.7 million births annually between 1910 and 1945. The term rock and roll was first used on a Cleveland radio station. Why is the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame located in Cleveland? Well, one reason is that a Cleveland DJ named Alan Freed coined the phrase rock and roll, at least publicly, on a 1951 radio broadcast. Freed hosted the Moondog Rock and Roll House Party, which popularized the name for the new uptempo sound.